Hello, everyone, and welcome back to physics class. Today, we are going to have a short lesson on how to write lab reports. The reason why we're doing this is because I will be expecting you guys to be able to write a lab report, and you need to know how to format one. So, without further ado, let's get started. So, what is the goal of writing a lab report? Well, a lab report is supposed to communicate exactly what you did in the experiment and also how you interpreted your results. It's supposed to be a way of telling people what you did, essentially. So, your lab report should include the following: the purpose of the lab, your hypothesis, your original hypothesis before you did the lab, your procedure, exactly how you did the lab, your results, the analysis of your results, and the conclusion. So let's go over all of the parts of a lab report. So the purpose explains the goal of the experiment. Purpose is usually composed of one or two complete sentences. For an example, the aim of this experiment is to determine if the angle of incline affects the acceleration of an object on the incline. So that's an example of a purpose for a lab report. Next is your hypothesis. The hypothesis is an educated guess as to what will happen in the lab. The hypothesis must be backed up with logical reasoning, and I'm going to highlight the logical reasoning. You have to have some kind of intuition or some kind of previous data set that you can use to back up your educated guess, your hypothesis. So here's an example. If the angle of an incline increases, then the acceleration of an object on the incline will increase because gravity will affect a greater force to be exerted on the object. So here I have stated what I'm guessing is going to happen. So if I change my angle of the incline, if I increase it specifically, then the acceleration of the object will also increase. So this is the beginning of my hypothesis. This is what I'm guessing is going to happen. And then I validate it with this phrase right here: because gravity will cause a greater force to be exerted on the object. So next is the procedure. The procedure lists all of the steps that you need to complete the experiment. It is important to note if you changed something from the original procedure. So in these labs that I'm going to be giving you, I'm going to give you a procedure that you are going to expect to follow. And if you make any changes, or if we have to make any changes to the procedure, we need to note that down in our lab report, in your lab report that you're doing. Next is the results. This is where you're going to tabulate or share your information with graphs. This is the section where you record your results, essentially. Write down any observations you make. So anything that you see or experience, write those down. Next up is the analysis. This is the part that is supposed to be the bulk of the lab report, or not even necessarily the bulk, but it's supposed to be the most thorough part of the lab report. So it is a very important section because this is where you are going to be interpreting your results. Interpreting your results could require you to perform calculations or even make a graph to show any kind of relationship between your data sets. You will also be expected to give a short written description of your results. So once you've done your calculations, once you've filled in all your tables and you've made your graphs where applicable, you will need to describe your results using full sentences, using words. And this can be quite hard. This is a skill that you will use if you decide to pursue any kind of career in science. Last, we have the conclusion. So the conclusion is a summary of your lab. So your paragraph should include the following. It should include one sentence explaining the purpose of the lab, one sentence explaining your hypothesis of the lab, a brief description of your results, just, say what you got, any inferences you made based on your data, so just a short summary, 1 or 2 sentences about your analysis, and then one sentence validating or disproving your hypothesis. This is very important. You need to go back to your hypothesis and you need to reference whether your hypothesis was proven correct or whether your hypothesis was incorrect. And of course, you have to validate it using data from your lab. And of course, in a conclusion, you also should have a sentence dedicated to discussing possible sources of error. So what do we mean by possible sources of error? Sources of error are things that could have happened that might have affected your results in the lab. And typically, we try to avoid mentioning anything that could have been like human error, so like mismeasuring something or miscalculating something. We try to avoid those types of sources of error. Typically, we would probably look to see more like things that we don't necessarily have in our control. So, for instance, friction could be something that we didn't have in our control, temperature, or anything like that. And that's basically what your lab report should comprise of. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all next time.